Hey guys, last time that we were talking about things, we were talking about the Fourth Crusade, and we talked about how the Fourth Crusade has successfully taken over Constantinople. Unfortunately, Constantinople is nowhere near where they wanted to go, which was to take over Egypt and then from there move on to Jerusalem. So that brings us to our next crusade. And in our next crusade, what ends up happening is since the failure of the Second Crusade to really do anything, the failure of the Third Crusade to retake over Jerusalem, and the failure of the Fourth Crusade to even go to the Middle East, it was decided that the reason why the Crusades weren't being successful was because they were sending adults to take over the Holy Land, and therefore we need to send children instead. So this is called the Children's Crusade. We don't need to write this down. I'm just going to talk about it. So the Children's Crusade, what ends up happening with that? Well, the Children's Crusade is a whole bunch of kids, anywhere from 8 to 14, and it was just kind of kids getting organized, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna go to the Holy Land, and we're gonna take it over from the Turks ourselves." So you got all these kids kind of gathering up and getting together, and they're heading towards the coastline. So you got all these kids gathering up throughout the kind of like Europe area, and they're heading towards the coastline. And once they get the coastline, they end up running into ship captains. Now, obviously, the children's crusade, these kids, they don't have any money and so forth. So they're talking to people and so forth, and they're trying to find like boats to take them over to the Middle East. Eventually, they do find some boat captains that are super nice. They're like, "Hey, we'll totally transport you over to the Middle East for free. You just gotta get into the bottom of our boats, and we'll take you on over." It turns out that those ship captains were slavers, and they just took all the children in the slaves and then sold them. So yeah, that's the Children's Crusade. A whole bunch of kids that didn't know what they were doing, and then they end up getting sold into slavery. All right, let's talk about the Fifth Crusade now. So, Fifth Crusade. Go ahead and make a new bullet and write down Fifth Crusade. So, bullet Fifth Crusade. So, the Fifth Crusade is launched in the year 1217. So, the last crusade we were talking about, the Fourth Crusade, stopped in 1204. Fifth Crusade is going to start in 1217, is when the Fifth Crusade is going to be launched. Go ahead and make a 1, and we're going to write down launched on June 1st, 1217. So, launched on June 1st, 1217. So, the Fifth Crusade is launched on June 1st of 1217. That's the day the truce with the Muslims, and basically there was a couple more truces made. Once again, truces end of fighting for a certain amount of time, and that's when the truce ended. Now, the Fifth Crusade is mainly launched by the Holy Roman Empire. So they're the main ones that are going to launch this. So it is the Holy Roman Empire that's launching this crusade. And they're going to follow the game plan that Richard I had established, which was, according to Richard I, the only way to take over Jerusalem and hold on to it was to take over Egypt first, which was what the Fourth Crusade was supposed to do, but then they got sidetracked. So we're going to make a number 2, and we're going to write down the crusade targeted the city of Damietta in Egypt. So number 2, the crusade targeted the city of Damietta in Egypt. So the Crusades' goal is to go to Damietta in Egypt to take that over, and then once they take over that city, they want to march towards Cairo of Egypt. So that's pretty much their entire goal. I'll show you that on the map here in a sec. Okay, so they want to go here to Damietta. So there's Damietta in the map. So they want to go from here, the Holy Roman Empire, over to here, Damietta. And then once they take over Damietta, they want to go down the Nile River to Cairo and then take over Cairo. And then once this area is secure, then they want to come over and take over Jerusalem. So that's their goal, is to take over Egypt and then come on over here. So that's the plan. So what actually ends up happening? Well, the Fifth Crusade, they show up at the city of Damietta. So they show up at the city of Damietta. Now, the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick, is not currently with them. He's still back in the Holy Roman Empire. And the leader of the Fifth Crusade, he's, sieging the city. He's cutting off from food and water. And he asks, or he sends a letter back to the Holy Roman Empire being like, "Hey, when do you want me to take over the city?" And the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick, is like, "Oh, well, just wait for me to get there. And then when I get there, you can take over the city." And the guy's like, "Okay." But then a year goes by. And after a year, then the leader of the Fifth Crusade gets a letter from the Holy Roman Emperor being like, "All right, yeah, you can just go ahead and take over the city." So Crusaders take over the city after a year. So they were starving the city out for a year. And then after a year, they do end up then taking over the city. Although since the city had no food for like a year, a lot of people are dead got a city. And I think also disease had ripped through the city as well in that time. Okay, so we're going to make a number 3, and we're going to write down, after a year-long siege, the city of Damietta fell to the Crusaders. So after a year, city of Damietta falls to Crusaders. And then the Crusaders are sitting in Damietta, and again, the 5th Crusade leader sends a message to Frederick asking what he wants them to do. And then Frederick's like, hey, just wait in Damietta, and I'll get there, and then we'll go down to Cairo together. So then again, the 5th Crusade is sitting around waiting in Damietta. They're there for a year, and then after a year, then there's a letter again that the 5th Crusade gets from Holy Roman Emperor being like, all right, I'm not going to make it. You guys can just go ahead and go down south without me. So the 5th Crusade's been in Damietta for 2 years now. So 2 years, one place. So they haven't made, a huge amount of progress yet. So what ends up happening next is the 5th Crusade starts to march down towards Cairo. All right, so let's see here. Let me make a little river. So we have our river. All right, so we got a Nile River flowing down like this, and then you have Damietta, and it's on the Mediterranean Sea. So you got your Mediterranean Sea here, and then you have like little splits here. You have your delta and such. Okay, so what ends up happening is the 5th Crusade, they eventually leave Damietta, and they're heading down south. So they're heading this way, down southward. And since it's taken them, since they were sitting around for like an entire year here, and it took them a year also to take it. So since they've been there for like 2 years in Damietta, what's happened is that the Egyptians have built a fort. So the Egyptians have built a fort down over here, kind of like right by one of the sections of the split in it. So they have like a little fort there. So Crusaders make their way down here. And once they make their way down here, they have to figure out kind of a way to get around the river. So they got to figure out a way to kind of get around it. And they're trying to figure out a way how to get around it. And while they're trying to figure out a way how they get around this river, where there's might be a place where they can ford it, the Egyptians break a dam along the river. That causes the river then to all flood down here. So the Crusaders are walking around a whole bunch of like flooded water. They're kind of flooded out. They decided they want to kind of head back, that they're going to retreat. However, the Egyptians also had some boats that they brought down onto the Nile River as well. So Crusaders end up getting caught between the Egyptians in the south and a whole bunch of boats they had brought down from the north. And with being pincered in between those two things and the floodwater, that forces the Crusade to give up and to return Damietta to the Egyptians. So yeah, that's the entire 5th Crusade. It starts off well. They take over Damietta, and then they get flooded out by Nile when the Egyptians break it, and then they're forced to give up. All right, so go ahead and make a number 4. We're going to write down the 5th Crusade is flooded by the Nile. So 4, 5th Crusade is flooded by the Nile. And after you have number 4, make a 5 and write down, force to surrender and give Damietta back in exchange for their lives. So 5, force to surrender and give Damietta back in exchange for their lives. So the Egyptians broke that dam. That dam then floods out. You can't really move anywhere. And then they get pincered in between some boats and between the forces that were in the south. And yeah. And then they have to give Damietta back in exchange for, being able to leave. So things didn't go the way the Crusaders were hoping it was going. And most people thought that since the Crusaders had taken over Damietta, that they could at least exchange Damietta for Jerusalem and that the 5th Crusade was going to be successful, but it turns out it was not. All right, so 5th Crusade, not successful. So what's going to happen now? Well, we got to move on to our next crusade, which is called Frederick's Crusade. So the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick, he decides that he wants to finally go on crusade, but not until he gets a little bit more motivation to go on crusade. I mean, he kept on saying he was going to go during the 5th Crusade and then just never showed up. So now it's a couple years later. We're in the year 1225, and he decides, all right. So the 5th Crusade ends in about 1221. Okay, so that's when the 5th Crusade comes in, is in 1221. So, if 4 years later, Frederick decides that he needs a little bit more motivation to go on crusade. He needs, a solid reason to go. And he finds that solid reason when he marries Isabella II. So we talked about Isabella before during the Third Crusade. This is her daughter, Isabella II. And Isabella II gets married to Frederick. However, Isabella II is only 13 at this time. So once Frederick gets married to Isabella, now he has a claim on the kingdom of Jerusalem through his wife that he just married. You gotta make a bullet and write down Frederick's Crusade. So bullet, Frederick's Crusade. After you have bullet, Frederick Crusade, go ahead and make a 1, and we're gonna write down made numerous promises to go on crusade. So number 1, made numerous promises to go on crusade. So Frederick, had been promising to go since like the 5th Crusade, and he just never did. And he constantly made promises that he was going to go. And he finally gets married to Isabella II in Jerusalem, which again gives him a claim on the kingdom of Jerusalem. However, what ends up happening is that he's like, all right, so it's 1225 now. He said he was going to go on crusade in 1215, so it's been like 10 years since he said he was going on crusade. The Pope is kind of getting annoyed with Frederick and being like, hey, Frederick, you keep on promising me you're going to go, and then you don't go. You finally got married. You have a claim now on the kingdom of Jerusalem. You need to get going. And Frederick's like, hey, I will get going. Give me 2 years here. So 2 years, 1227, I'll get my entire army together, and I will go over to the Middle East. So Pope's like, all right. 2 years go by. It's in the year 1227. And Frederick's like, oh, Pope, I mean, I would get going, but I'm not feeling very good right now. I'm feeling kind of sick. At this point in time, the Pope had gotten sick of Frederick's excuses, and he excommunicates Frederick II. Once again, if you're excommunicated, you can't go to heaven. All right, so Frederick II gets excommunicated by the Pope, but Frederick's like, well, look, I'll get going. All right, I'm not feeling good right now. I'll go next year in 1228. I'll get going in 1228. So in the next year of 1228, he said he's going to get going in May of 1228. So then May of 1228 comes around, and again, Frederick, he can't go. This time it's because his wife is going to give birth. So Isabella II. And he's like, oh man, I would go, but my wife's gonna give birth. I gotta be there for my wife. Very important to be there for your wife when she's giving birth. So I can't go again. But I promise, as soon as my wife is done giving birth, I will get going. Okay, let's make a number 2, if we would. We're gonna write down Frederick became sick. So write that down for number 2. Frederick became sick. And then after we had 2, Frederick became sick, we're going to write down right after that what's here in parentheses, excommunicated. That just means, once again, you can't go to heaven if you get excommunicated. So 2, Frederick became sick, and then what's down here in parentheses, excommunicated. So again, his wife, she finally gives birth in May, and then Frederick's like, all right, I promise I will get going. So finally, he does get his army together. So after his wife gives birth, he gets his army together down over here, and he starts making his way towards the kingdom of Jerusalem. So he's making his way towards the kingdom of Jerusalem. However, again, being Frederick is the way he is, he stops off in Cyprus for a 5-week vacation. As a sea travel, very, very rough on someone. So he stops off in Cyprus for 5 weeks, has a little bit of vacation, and then after he's done 5 weeks in Cyprus taking vacation, he heads over to the kingdom of Jerusalem. All right. So he left in June of 1228. So, a month after his wife gave birth. Gets in Cyprus, takes 5 weeks off. And then eventually lands in the Holy Land in September. So eventually in September, he finally gets to the Holy Land. And Frederick isn't trying to fight any battles right now. He's just kind of marching his army around, building up some fortifications. He's sending some letters over to the Turk leaders. So he sends some letters to him. He isn't really fighting in battles. Heads over to Jaffa. We talked about Jaffa before, about how that's your kind of your staging point for launching an attack on Jerusalem. So he goes down to Jaffa, starts preparing some supplies down there. Again, he's sending letters to the Turk leader. Couple of months go by, so he's there in September. He's there in like October, November, December, January, February, March. But in March, Frederick just kind of shows up at Jerusalem. Their gates are open, and he just kind of walks in and takes over the city. So what ends up happening? Well, so we said that Frederick was sending letters to the Turks. It happens that he made a deal with the Turks. So he makes a deal with the Turks for him to have Jerusalem. And when Frederick shows up in Jerusalem, he has the priest at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre crown him king of Jerusalem. So he's like, all right, sweet. I'm going to have the priest right here. I'm going to have this guy crown me king of Jerusalem. And the priest is like, all right, I mean, you've taken over the city. I'll crown you king. How did you get the Turks to agree to give you the city? And Frederick's like, oh, it was easy. I just promised that I would tear down the city walls of Jerusalem and leave it completely undefended. And the priest is like, wait, what? No, I'm not going to crown you king. Like, the Turks are just going to take back the city as soon as you leave. And Frederick's like, well, I'll crown myself king. So that's why you see this in the picture right here. That's Frederick II. That's why he's crowning himself king, and the priest is not. So Frederick crowns himself king. He had a 10-year truce agreement with the Turks. So he would be. So Jerusalem would stay under control of the Christians for 10 years. And then as soon as that truce ended, the Turks just took it right back because, city was completely undefended and had no city walls. All right. Let's go ahead and make it number 3. And we're going to write down on March 18th, 1229, Frederick was crowned king of Jerusalem in Jerusalem. So I'm going to write that down for number 3. So is Frederick's crusade successful? Yes. I mean, the entire point of a crusade is to take over the Jerusalem. I mean, that's the entire point of it. And he did take it over. I mean, be it for just 10 years. But he did successfully take over Jerusalem for 10 years for Christians. And then, of course, it was immediately conquered by the Turks after the truce ended. All right, and we're going to make a number 4, and we're going to write down 10-year truce. So number 4, 10-year truce. So we saw in the first crusade, it was pretty successful. It took a bunch of territory and took over Jerusalem. Second crusade doesn't do anything. It makes the situation worse. Third crusade retakes over the coastline from Saladin. Fourth crusade goes the wrong place. Fifth crusade starts off good, and then they get flooded out by Nile. And then Frederick makes a deal to hold on Jerusalem for 10 years. All right. Next time, we'll talk about the last of the Crusades.